Welcome everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. Today we have a follow-up from our earlier article this week on Bernie Sanders and his position on billionaires. And it is from Jacobin magazine. Jacobin, as you may not know, is an overtly left-leaning magazine that is pro-socialism, pro-communism, pro-Marxist thought. So as you might imagine, an article by them is going to have a pretty serious slant. The nice thing about that is that it leads them to make their arguments more clearly. Things that are couched or carefully phrased in other outlets are just said outright in this particular outlet. And so we're going to dive into this article, and it's going to confirm some of the conclusions that we drew earlier this week, and it's going to build on that. We're going to talk about it. Buckle up, this one might be a long one. We'll see how it goes. Headline, Bernie Sanders, billionaires shouldn't exist. That's the headline. Nice, concise, tight. I like it. In a recent interview, Bernie Sanders was forced to defend his position that billionaires shouldn't exist to an exasperated Chris Wallace. Sanders is absolutely right. A humane system wouldn't produce such dramatic disparities in the distribution of resources. In the opening two paragraphs, they review the Chris Wallace interview, and they clarify, and again, this is Jacobin reporting on it, who is a big fan of Bernie Sanders, so we're assuming they understand his policy. You may remember we were a little confused whether or not Bernie Sanders was proposing a income tax of 100% above $1 billion a year or a wealth confiscation tax, because the reporting was kind of contradictory. This seems to clear that up. He's talking about confiscating wealth over $1 billion. That's the clear position that we're discussing, and so we will use that as the basis for our analysis going forward. We have a particular quote that illustrates one of the fundamental problems with the analysis in this article compared to real life. And we're going to talk about it, but I want to put it on the record. You say flatly that billionaires should not exist, Wallace began. Sanders dryly insists it is possible to get by on $999 million. Further, in his book, Sanders writes that billionaires possess more of the planet's largesse than they could burn through in 1,000 lifetimes. Then the article mentions a little bit of commentary. That's a bit of an exaggeration. Some people are really good at burning through money. Because this sort of statement, it is either supremely ignorant or supremely arrogant. Here's why. Capitalists don't just use money to consume it on their own desires, to burn through money, using the money to get by. These are phrases from a consumer perspective. These are phrases from people who are either being intentionally or obtuse or intentionally ignorant. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It is the fundamental secret to the modern economy. I learned it from a book written by Robert Kiyosaki, and here it is. Rich people become rich people because they buy things that go up in value or generate cash flow. Poor people become poor people because they buy things that go down in value or drain cash flow. I'll give you an example. If I have $100,000 and I buy a piece of rental property, I have purchased with that $100,000 an asset. That asset, especially if I maintain it well and I do a good job managing that capital investment, is going to become worth more over time. In 20 years, it might be worth $180,000. In the interim, it's a rental property. I'm going to provide shelter to someone who doesn't have that much capital. They're going to pay me monthly, and my asset, my purchase, is going to put money in my pocket. I have purchased something that's done both, goes up in value and generates cash flow. If I have $100,000 and I buy a $100,000 sports car, no matter what I do with that sports car, in 20 years, it's going to be worth near zero. And along the way, it's going to cost me money in maintenance, in fuel, in taxes and insurance and registration fees and a variety of different things. A very fancy sports car is not an asset. It's a liability. Over time, it goes down in value. And over that same time period, it costs me cash flow. If you want to be rich in America, buy things that go up in value. If you want to be poor, buy things that go down in value. Problem solved. Let the self-sorting begin. Because that's really what's at the fundamental heart of this argument. Who gets to decide what I do every day? Who gets to decide how excellent I want to be in the market? Who gets to decide how much I'm rewarded for my excellence or my laziness? Who gets to decide how I spend the money that the market rewards me with? Leftists claim the moral virtue of saying that it is a better system for them to decide what I should do for a living, how much I should get paid for it, and what I'm allowed to spend that money on. They are wrong on a moral level. They're wrong on a practical level. They're wrong on a philosophical level. It is frustrating to see otherwise somewhat smart people who spout these horrendous ideas as if they're new and fresh and as if they work, and even worse, as if they are morally virtuous. Bernie Sanders says that it's possible to get by on $999 million. When he says that, what he's saying is he wants you to think that billionaires just consume their wealth. That they somehow, it's a little bit of a black box thinking, magic black box. Somehow they got to today. And today they have so much wealth that even if they just sat on a mega yacht and did everything they could to try and get by or burn that wealth or whatever, even then they couldn't get through it. This is so far from reality, it's ludicrous. Capitalists become successful because they are efficient at taking capital. They know how to spot an opportunity. They put capital towards those things that are a good risk. That risk pays off, and they are rewarded for their diligence and their stewardship and their willingness to assume the risk of investment and innovation. Most small businesses fail. A lot of big businesses fail over time. Back to the article. Like I said, in a lot of this reporting, it's flowery phrased or it's said in a roundabout way, but here we're hearing it flat out. At least they're willing to make the case honestly. Bernie is right. In fact, he could have gone even further, calling not just for redistributing more of billionaires' money through progressive taxation, but going to the source of the problem by bringing their businesses under collective ownership. He's overtly calling to nationalize private industry. He's overtly calling to confiscate wealth. He is calling for the overthrow of the American economy and the American system of governance, the American system of private property. He wants a revolution. No surprise. He's a Jacobin. He's a socialist. This is what socialists believe. I don't want to get bogged down too much on this, but Bernie Sanders makes this weird correlation between Russian oligarchs and American billionaires. There's several layers of irony here, but let's try and keep it brief. Russian oligarchs are famously corrupt and came to power controlling industry because of their political connections. In other words, a political process overrode market processes and changed the ownership of these businesses, thereby creating these mega rich, super corrupt oligarchs. And pretty much everyone thinks that's bad. I don't know anyone who's in favor of Russian oligarchs. Bernie Sanders makes the argument that in the American system, American billionaires are the equivalent of Russian oligarchs. Even though the oligarchs were created by the state coming in, taking over the ownership of private industry and redirecting that ownership in another way. That's exactly what he just called for. But that's what created the oligarchs. But then he says, even though we haven't done that yet, we have American billionaires and they're just like oligarchs. It's a rat's nest. It's a rat's nest. But it does also reveal another twisty layer to their logic, which is worth addressing, even though, again, it's just ludicrous. According to the author of the article, the self-made part of being a self-made billionaire is a bit rich, given that many of the people Wallace is talking about grew up in extreme privilege and benefit from government subsidies, too big to fail bailouts, and public sector-driven technological innovation. In other words, he's saying that the billionaires are corrupt and not really worth what they say they're worth because of government intervention in the marketplace. And his solution to that is more government intervention in the marketplace. Here's a weird idea coming from someone who doesn't agree with communists. Get rid of government subsidies. Get rid of too big to fail bailouts. Get rid of public sector driven technological innovation. Get rid of all of those things. One, that means less wasted taxpayer dollars. Two, it means a more efficient marketplace where capital actually goes where it needs to go. And three, it removes one of their dumb talking points. He's using policies I actively oppose as evidence that my economic philosophy is wrong. No, they're evidence of the operation of your economic philosophy, that the market is better off when the government intervenes. I have to include this just because it's rare for Marxists to own it, but here it is. Wallace isn't wrong that America's oligarchs... Sure, why not? Let's go ahead and just call them oligarchs, because words don't mean anything. They're engaged in the process of capital accumulation that Karl Marx described as MCM. They use money to buy commodities, which they can either resell or use to produce new goods or services that they can sell, converting the commodities into more money. In the process, they employ lots of people. How is any of that a bad thing? You have capital. You use that capital to take a risk and say, I'm going to try and turn this capital into more capital. How do I do that? By providing a wage to people who don't want to be capitalists, who would rather just work for a living, and by taking a risk where I think I can find a way to meet the need of a marketplace so that private individuals will voluntarily give me money that they have in exchange for the goods I'm producing, because my goods that I'm producing represent an increase in the value. In other words, they're making a trade where they can give me $10 and acquire something that would cost them more than $10 to produce. The private person who chose to purchase my product is better off because they have the product that they need or want for less than they could produce it themselves. And I'm better off because I'm getting paid more than it cost me to produce it. Everybody wins in this transaction. There are no losers in this transaction. Show me where my logic is wrong. Then, just to carry it on, capitalists who successfully do MCM like it's some sort of subversive, I don't even know, whatever. Capitalists who successfully do this end up with more excess capital because they took that $100,000 in the rental property. After 20 years, they sell that property for $200,000 and they buy 2 rental properties because they have excess capital. They have capital that they don't need to get by on. They have capital that they're not trying to burn through. They have capital that they want to use in the marketplace to create wealth. Okay, next thing. Wallace is right to imply that Russian oligarchs are fundamentally unnecessary to the process of production, which existed before they had the keys handed to them by friends in high places. American billionaires are equally superfluous. That is nonsense. And I'm only not cursing because my kids watch these videos. But I have so many words for this. Let's unpack this for you. All right? Let's try and make this real simple for the dense kids in the back of the room. This analysis assumes a factory in existence, producing goods that there is a demand for, a stable demand for, with sufficient efficiency that it is profitable, that it's a self-sustaining enterprise. And it completely ignores the fact most small businesses fail. Somebody had to have the idea for the product that factory was going to produce. Somebody had to design a factory that could produce it efficiently. Someone had to pay to train the workers. Someone had to pay to acquire the goods necessary to begin to produce these things. Someone had to market the goods to the economy to get people interested in the product that they were making, creating demand. Someone had to write up the contracts with the suppliers so that they could have a steady supply of the commodities or whatever raw goods that they use in this factory. This analysis ignores all of the risk, all of the effort, all of the design work that went in, and again, just assumes this magical world in which an efficient, profitable factory just exists. That is so naive as to either be incredibly ignorant or intentionally obtuse. The person who wrote this is a university professor, so he's not dumb. Therefore, he's being obtuse. He is intentionally distorting the picture to get his point across, to make his point more persuasive. Further, it assumes that the demand for the goods produced by this factory will continue into the future. Maybe this is a buggy whip factory on the cusp of the inception of the American car industry. Guess what? In 30 years, I don't care how efficient your buggy whip factory is. Nobody wants them anymore. You've been replaced by innovation. In other words, this assumes no need for research and development. This assumes no need for strategic thinking. This assumes no need to innovate, refine, or improve your product. Steve Jobs did a great job designing the iPhone. Let's say we nationalized Apple right after he invented the iPhone, and there's a huge demand for it. And we just said, perfect, we're going to just keep pumping out these iPhones because everybody loves them. And we didn't put any money into innovating the product, didn't put any money into R&D, didn't put it into development, didn't put it into analyzing market trends or whatever. Do you really think that 15 years later, that first generation iPhone is still going to be a big seller? No. You have to keep innovating. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep risking a portion of your profits on new products, on innovations and improvements of the existing products, on market analysis and research, so you can know where to take your company. All of that is activity that is outside this super dumb factory paradigm. Basically, the argument of Marxists is this. You have a factory. It just magically exists. And you have workers in the factory that just magically stuff comes in through the dock. We don't know where it comes from, but we know how to unpack it. We know how to assemble it. We know how to turn it into a product. And we know that someone will buy that product and we ship it out. We don't really know where it goes, but it goes to people who send us money. We are therefore profitable. The value of the labor of the factory worker, the value they create, is greater than what the factory owner pays them. Therefore, the factory owner is an unscrupulous bad guy. Or the factory owner, the capitalist, whatever you want to call him, says, I'm going to exchange my money for their labor, voluntarily exchanged. They're happy to do it. I'm happy to do it. There are no losers in this conversation. There is no forced labor here. And in exchange, I am going to give them an environment that is safe, repeatable, and secure. All they have to do is be factory workers, and they don't have to worry about anything further up the supply chain or down the distribution chain. They only have to worry about their little slice. And there's a value to that, to the factory worker, because it lets them live a very good, profitable, simple life. That was Henry Ford's great innovation. Pay his factory workers enough that they could afford his product, make them relatively wealthy compared to other people, and give them a life that was so economically productive that they could afford to narrow their focus and specialize and make their labor more valuable. But in return, the capitalist agrees to own all of the worry and all of the concern and all of the risk for everything upstream and everything downstream from the factory. Marxists believe the world begins at the loading dock where stuff comes into the factory floor and ends at the distribution point when stuff gets shipped out to the customers. That is the entire universe of economic activity. If you believe that, you are foolish in the extreme. It just baffles me that a regular person with enough sense to be walking around talking to people actually fundamentally believes that. There was so much in here that I normally just riff. I normally don't do any kind of a script or plotting or points or anything. There was so much meat in here that I said, I got to start writing this down. I wrote 20 points I wanted to cover in this video. I've been filming for 30 minutes. I think I've covered 4 of them. This topic is important, and it is incredible to me that we are still having this conversation. The 20th century, from a historical perspective, was arguably the biggest case study on the planet. In the history of the planet, we had several countries that adopted a more free market ethos, a private property supporting ethos, a philosophy and a governance system that said we're going to give you a rule of law environment where your private property rights are protected, where you will be able to be rewarded for your innovation, where you can patent your intellectual property and profit from it and license it to people, where we are going to support your desire to create value in the marketplace. And we're going to tax you so we can run our society. But other than hopefully somewhat reasonable taxes, we're pretty much going to get out of the way. And several other very large influential countries said, forget all that. We're going to pursue a utopia instead. And that utopia is going to be achieved by centralized control of an economy where government bureaucrats who don't have any risk get to decide what the economy does and who owns pieces of the economy and how much money is in circulation. There's an old saying in Soviet Russia, we'll pretend to work so long as they pretend to pay us. There was so little in the way of profit, of revenue from Soviet industry once they really got a stranglehold on their economy, that everybody got drastically poor very quickly. Drastically poor. To a level that American citizens couldn't even comprehend. I mean, Americans go to a supermarket where they have a wide variety of food that's fresh, that's good quality, that's reasonably priced, and there's plenty of it. Russians stand in bread lines, speaking particularly of Soviet Russia, although Bernie Sanders is a fan of bread lines, so whatever, neither here nor there. Which one's better, a grocery store or a bread line? I feel like by the end of the 20th century, after communism killed 100 million people, and America saved the world from a variety of tyrants and dictators, and navigated the entire world to a place where now the base level of subsistence poverty for the poorest people in the world, not just America, but in the world, is so dramatically above where it was 100, 150 years ago, beginning of the 20th century. In 1900, the wealthiest people didn't have air conditioning, didn't have refrigeration. Here's a fact that'll blow your mind. Calvin Coolidge, President of the United States, his son plays tennis one day and gets a blister on his toe from playing tennis in the heat. That blister gets infected and the president's son dies of infection. That was 100 years ago. The president's son had such a low access to medical care that a blister on his toe killed him. In the last 100 years, we've done a lot to improve and innovate and raise the standard of living of everybody in the world. And we still, pardon my language, we still have people bitching about the fact that some guys got wealthy because they're good at being capitalists, while simultaneously enjoying the fruits of the innovation from the people who are good at being capitalists. Quit complaining. Quit trying to use class envy and stupid rhetorical tricks to try and distort the American economy, to try and distort the minds of influential young people who might actually believe this crap that you're spilling and turn their backs on being part of the freest, wealthiest, and I will say it because it's true, but it's a whole other topic, fairest economies in the history of the world. And the only reason why I'd put an asterisk on that is because in the modern economy, we have a whole ton of government intervention in our economy. We have so much government control, little insidious fingers of regulation and direction and tax policy and twisty weirdness that makes us less free than we could be. We have accepted those fingers of control from the government, and that is to our own shame for accepting those levers of power, those levers of control and direction that we take from the government to make us better, more equitable, more fair. It doesn't make us more fair. It makes us worse off, and it's immoral to begin with. That is my Reddit rant for today. Sorry I went long. It's a rich vein to mine. Good luck out there.